A few days before her birthday, Heather lived a day like any other. Her morning routine went on as usual. She woke up early, took a shower, got dressed, and prepared to go to school. Her parents, always busy with work, barely spending time with her, but Heather understood. Fortunately, she always had Eva, her best friend. They spent most of their time together. That particular day, during recess, the two friends sat in a secluded corner. Eva seemed to have something to tell her as she watched her with excitement. It was clear that it had to do with her birthday gift. With a smile, Eva asked her to close her eyes. When Heather opened them, she saw a gold necklace in Eva's hand, a symbol of their friendship. The necklace was designed to hold a small photo inside, and Heather received it with tears of joy. What was most amazing was that without even knowing, Heather had also prepared a surprise for her. She took a silver necklace from her pocket, one she had kept with great care. For them, gold and silver represented their bond, two precious and different metals. Suddenly the bell rang, signaling the end of recess and bringing them back to reality. She wore the necklace proudly, promising she would always take care of it. After school, Heather was heading home when she noticed something different in her neighborhood. A new family had moved in across from her house. Without thinking it too much, she approached to welcome them. Among the boxes and the hustle of the move, she saw a young man who took her breath away. From the moment she saw him, she felt something she had never experienced before. Without a second thought, she walked up to him and introduced herself, welcoming him. The young man's name was Marcus Baker. He thanked her for the welcome and mentioned that his parents had spoken about her a few hours earlier. The conversation was brief, as he had to go back to help his mother with the furniture. But those few words were enough for Heather to feel completely captivated. Blushing, she said goodbye and quickly walked back home, where her parents were waiting with her usual question about how her day had gone. Although she could barely contain her excitement, she simply answered that everything had gone well. With the image of Marcus lingering in her mind, she went up to her room, organized her notebooks, and began her schoolwork. Despite her attempt to concentrate, her mind kept wandering, thinking about her new neighbor. When night came, she followed her usual routine, brushing her teeth and getting ready for bed. However, that night marked the beginning of something terrifying. While she slept, the first nightmare arrived without warning, disturbing her rest. It had been very strange, but who hasn't had a horrible nightmare at least once? The next morning, after waking up and taking a shower, Heather went to the mirror to brush her teeth and comb her hair. But what she saw wasn't her usual reflection. Instead of her face, she saw the face of a young woman with blindfolded eyes, short hair, and a sinister smile that froze her blood. Confused and terrified, she looked again. But then she only found her normal reflection, just like always. She tried to calm herself, convincing herself it had been a simple hallucination. Throughout the afternoon, after school and finishing her homework, Heather decided she wanted to spend more time with Marcos. She also thought about introducing him to Eva, hoping that the most important people in her life would meet each other. The three of them spent a pleasant afternoon talking and laughing. She couldn't stop thinking about him, although she knew there was a big age gap. Marcus was 18, and he would never be interested in a girl like her. However, since the arrival of that family to the neighborhood, strange events had begun to happen. The nightmares continued, and the figure of the girl in the mirror reappeared again and again. In each dream, the situation worsened. That sinister figure tried to kill her in very violent and terrifying ways. It burned her alive until she was reduced to ashes, tore off her head, and on other occasions it split her limbs in two. However, the most painful moment always came at the end. The girl held a pair of huge scissors and stabbed Heather's eyes with them. Tears filled her. She wondered what those dreams could mean. The day of her 11th birthday arrived. Her parents were excited, preparing to organize a surprise party. Although they had the day off, they needed time to decorate and organize everything before the celebration. They didn't know who to leave Heather with while they worked on their preparations so she wouldn't find out. This led them to consider asking their new neighbors, the Bakers, for help. Despite her mother's doubts, it seemed like a good option, as they had been very kind people. So they went to the Baker house to ask them for the favor. When they arrived, only Marcus was home, and he kindly agreed to look after Heather until they were done. Everything seemed to be in order, but as soon as her parents left, he took out his phone and made a call. He mentioned that the plan was in motion, and after laughing sinisterly, Meanwhile, Heather was returning from school. When she arrived home, she was surprised to see the door slightly ajar. Perhaps her parents had gone out for something. However, upon entering, she was startled to find Marcus sitting on the couch in her living room. There were birthday decorations, but it seemed like they hadn't finished. Some balloons, a happy birthday banner with several letters still missing, and various sweets on the table. The young man explained that her parents had asked him to look after her, but there was something in his tone, a strange laugh, that made Heather feel increasingly uncomfortable. The situation worsened when Heather asked when her parents would return, and Marcus coldly told her they wouldn't be coming back. Suddenly, 2 more young men entered the room. Fear completely overtook Heather as she slowly backed away, so Heather decided to take action. She grabbed her backpack and threw it at Marcus with all her strength, taking advantage of the confusion to flee. She ran to her room while the 2 friends chased her, armed with knives. Although they managed to tear her clothes and injure her arms and legs, Heather managed to escape and reach her room. She quickly locked the door and devised a plan. She opened the window to make them think she had escaped and then hid under the bed, hoping the trick would work. The young people entered by destroying the door to his room and began their search. Seeing the window open, Marcus, irritated, ordered his friends to go out and look for her on the street. They were about to leave the room when Heather accidentally let out a small gasp. One of the boys heard her and stopped. Terrified, Heather watched as he crouched down, slowly lifting the blanket that covered the bottom. At that moment, her hiding place was discovered. Heather ran away, but before she could escape, the youths caught her. Although she screamed and cried for help, Marcus silenced her by hitting her on the head with a lamp. The blow left her unconscious on the ground. When the girl woke up, she had a great pain in her head. Blood ran down her forehead from the blow. Opening her eyes wide, she found herself tied to a chair, her hands pinned behind her back and her legs secured to the front paws. Panic filled her as she watched Marcus and his friends approach her. "Why are you doing this? And where are Mom and Dad?" Marcus started to laugh. Then he stood in front of her, with his face close to hers as he answered, "Well, let's just say they had to leave for a long time." Then he took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed her some terrible photographs. 2 severed hands could be seen, with a wedding ring on each one. Heather quickly recognized the rings. They were her parents' mutilated hands. Marcos offered her a way out. If she wanted to survive, she would have to become his slave. She refused his demands again and again, but that made him even more angry. He ordered one of his friends to untie her right arm, holding it in the air. And without hesitation, he cut it with a knife. The pain was so intense that Heather barely reacted. Her screams were silenced as her body trembled. Blood flowed and her arm lay on the ground. Not content with the suffering, Marcus grabbed some scissors from the kitchen and coldly stuck them in her left eye. He brutally removed the eye and then mercilessly proceeded to do the same to her right eye, leaving her blind and disfigured. Heather could no longer see anything but darkness, as blood flowed from the sockets where her eyes used to be. Finally, after so much suffering, her body stopped responding. Marcus, irritated, cursed her corpse. After uttering his last words of contempt, he and his friends abandoned her, leaving her lying and bleeding on the floor of her house. Heather woke up in a place that seemed straight out of a nightmare, surrounded by the screams of other people. Her wounds were still open, everything was confusing and terrifying. As she tried to understand where she was, a voice sounded around her, welcoming her. She asked aloud where she was, and the entity replied that she was in its palace. The voice asked if she was ready to say goodbye, to which the girl begged for one last favor. "I don't want to leave yet. I need to take revenge on those who killed me." The being listened to her request with mocking laughter and joined the desperation and resentment of the young girl. After a moment of reflection, it agreed to grant her wish, but not without a price. Heather would be its minion, its eternal servant, immortal and condemned to obey its orders forever. Suddenly, the being snapped its fingers, and an unbearable pain was unleashed throughout Heather's body. She felt as if something was clinging to her arm and then stabbing her heart, her stomach, and her legs. She felt as though something new had fused with her very being. "It's time," said the voice, and suddenly it appeared before her. Before saying goodbye, it introduced itself. Its name was Zalgo. Then it touched her forehead and sent her back to the real world. Heather opened her eyes, surprised by the absence of pain and the fact that she could see again. With her hands, she touched the empty sockets where her eyes had been before. But somehow, she now possessed a vision beyond human, something supernatural. Her arm? She had regained it, though it didn't feel like before. Soon after, she had arrived at the Baker house. There were Marcus and his friends, laughing and looking at the cruel photos and videos of her torture. Suddenly, the three young men jumped, startled by a noise coming from the entrance. Heather turned into a vengeful creature, moved furiously as she pounced on them. The first to fall was one of Marcus' friends, who was shocked when he felt a gigantic black hand pass through his abdomen. In horror, he watched as his own insides were ripped out and fell to the ground. The young man screamed, but Heather, relentless, put an end to his agony by crushing his head with her foot. The scene left Marcus shaken as he realized that Heather, who they thought was dead, was there to kill them. The girl then lunged to his other friends, sinking her teeth into his shoulder and tearing off chunks of flesh. She mutilated his arms without difficulty, and finally, she tore out his eyes. She had left Marcus for last. He had the same expression of terror that Heather had a few hours ago. In desperation, he grabbed an axe and with all his strength cut off Heather's left arm. But to his horror, the girl's body no longer obeyed the laws of life and death. Heather mercilessly tortured him slowly. With a pair of scissors, she drew a half smile on the young man's cheeks, delighted in his cries of pain. She saw him cry, tremble, and beg, and finally, in one brutal move, ripped off her head. The room was covered in blood, and Heather, satisfied, burst into mad laughter. "I want more! I want more!" she shouted. Without thinking, she appeared at her friend Eva's house. In silence, she watched her sleep, raising the scissors with her intention of ending her life. "Goodbye, Eva." But at that moment, something stopped her. She saw the necklace her friend was wearing, and a wave of memories came flooding back to her. Suddenly, Eva woke up scared and saw Heather, although only for a moment. Believing it was a hallucination, the girl rubbed her eyes and her friend disappeared. Frightened that she had almost harmed her best friend, she escaped into the forest. She fell to her knees, sobbing and screaming in pain. She understood that there was no turning back. She crossed a line she couldn't undo. Vengeance had consumed her completely, and she was no more than a shadow of what she had once been. Later, Heather returned to Zalgo's presence. Her immortality would keep her trapped in the body of a girl, always young. Her parents, her friend Eva, all of them had remained in the past. She cut her hair and put a blindfold on her eyes. She was no longer Heather Parker. That girl was dead. The world would soon know who she was. Eyeless Heather.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!